Greetings, esteemed friends and discerning minds. Dr. John Watson here from our humble abode on Baker Street. Tonight I invite you to join us on an extraordinary journey into the labyrinthine depths of a mystery that truly tested my companion's formidable intellect. It was a case born amidst the swirling mists of a London autumn, where shadows danced with secrets and every gas lamp seemed to guard an unspoken truth. Prepare yourselves, for the air was thick with intrigue, and the very fog over Lambeth Street seemed to whisper of foul play. Before we delve into this fascinating account, I implore you to join our growing community of truth seekers. Subscribe to the channel and let us embark together. Now, let's begin with the first chapter of The Fog Over Lambeth Street. Chapter 1. The Stillness on Lambeth Street. The omnipresent November fog, a familiar shawl draped over London, had tightened its grip with unusual tenacity that evening, clinging to the grimy bricks of tenements and muting the distant rumble of carriages to a mere whisper. It was a fog not merely of vapour, but of disquiet, and it had settled particularly heavy over Lambeth Street when a hansom cab, bearing the familiar figures of myself and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, rattled to a halt before a modest, yet outwardly respectable red brick house. The address, delivered via a hastily penned note from Inspector Davies, spoke of an unfortunate incident, a euphemism I had come to associate with the gravest of human tragedies. Holmes, ever the epitome of focused energy, had been uncharacteristically silent during our journey from Baker Street, his keen eyes, usually scanning the passing street for stray details, instead fixed on some unseen point in the swirling miasma. He wore his deerstalker, its flaps tied beneath his chin, and his Inverness cape billowed faintly around him as he stepped from the cab, an almost spectral figure in the swirling grey. I followed, fumbling for my medical bag, the damp chill already seeping into my bones. "A thick blanket, Watson," Holmes remarked, his voice low, as if not to disturb the profound stillness that had fallen over the street. "Excellent conditions for certain undertakings, and equally excellent for obscuring the aftermath." A constable, a stoic figure whose uniform seemed to emerge reluctantly from the fog, stood guard at the front door. He recognised Holmes instantly, offering a deferential nod before ushering us inside. The hallway was dimly lit by a single gas jet, its flame flickering nervously, casting long dancing shadows. The air within was surprisingly warm, almost stuffy, and carried a faint, unusual scent. Not unpleasant, yet certainly out of place, a subtle sweetness layered with something metallic. "Inspector Davies awaits you in the study, Mr. Holmes," the constable murmured, gesturing towards a door at the end of the hall. We proceeded, our footsteps muffled by the thick Turkish rug that ran the length of the passage. The house, I noted, seemed meticulously kept, albeit with an air of quiet, somewhat dusty antiquity. Each piece of furniture, each ornament suggested a history, a life lived with a reverence for the past. Inspector Davies, a man whose patience was often stretched thin by Holmes's methods, but whose respect for his genius was undeniable, stood with his back to the fireplace, his broad shoulders almost filling the mantelpiece. His face, usually ruddy, was pale and drawn, a clear indicator of the gravity of the situation. He gestured towards an armchair, its velvet upholstery a rich, faded crimson, where a gentleman sat quite still. "Holmes, Watson," Davies began, his voice gravelly. "A most perplexing business. Mr. Silas Blackwood, a prominent collector of rare manuscripts and a respected philanthropist, found by his housekeeper not an hour ago." I approached cautiously, my medical training overriding the inherent sense of trepidation. Mr. Blackwood was slumped slightly in the armchair, his head resting against the high back. His spectacles had fallen askew on his nose, and his hand, which lay limply on the armrest, clutched a small, intricately carved ivory figurine, its surface smooth and cold. There was a faint, unusual discoloration on his neck, barely visible beneath his starched collar, and a curious, almost floral aroma lingered subtly around him, mingling with the metallic hint I had first detected. His expression was one of profound bewilderment, suggesting a swift and unexpected end. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing to indicate violence. The room itself was a sanctuary of erudition, walls lined with packed bookshelves, a magnificent mahogany desk covered with papers, and various ancient artifacts displayed in glass cases. Holmes, meanwhile, had not even glanced at the deceased. Instead, his gaze swept across the room with an almost preternatural swiftness, taking in every detail. The alignment of the books, the pattern of dust on a particular shelf, the way the light fell through the drawn curtains. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly as he inhaled the peculiar scent. He knelt briefly beside a small ornate wastepaper basket near the desk, then rose and moved to the heavy velvet curtains, drawing them back slightly to peer out into the fog-shrouded garden beyond. "The windows were locked from the inside, Mr. Holmes," Davies stated, anticipating the question. "As was the front door. No signs of forced entry anywhere. It's as if he simply expired in his chair." Holmes finally turned, his eyes, now bright with a nascent spark of interest, fixed on the inspector. "And the housekeeper, Inspector? What did she observe?" "Mrs. Gable," Davies replied, sighing. "A nervous woman, quite distraught. She found him when she brought his evening tea. Said she noticed nothing amiss earlier in the day. No visitors, no unusual sounds. The only thing she mentioned was a faint, almost sickly sweet odour when she first entered the room, which she dismissed as a peculiar incense he sometimes burned." Holmes walked slowly around the armchair, his gaze now settling intently on the victim's hand clutching the ivory figurine. He did not touch it, but merely observed it, his lips pursed in thought. "And this figurine, Inspector? Was it always within his grasp?" Davies scratched his chin. "Mrs. Gable said Mr. Blackwood was a creature of habit. He usually kept that particular piece, a small goddess from the Orient, on his desk. Never on his person, certainly not clutched like this. She's certain of it." Holmes straightened up, his eyes now scanning the room again, but with a renewed intensity, as if he were rereading a page he had only skimmed before. He paused at the fireplace, running a gloved finger along the mantelpiece, then sniffed it. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of the unusual scent. He moved to the desk, his gaze lingering on a small empty silver locket that lay open amidst a scatter of papers, its chain conspicuously missing. "Interesting, Inspector," Holmes murmured, a spark of excitement in his voice. "Most interesting indeed. The theatre has been set with exquisite care, yet a vital prop has been misplaced. A small, subtle play, performed for an audience of none, save for the Grim Reaper himself." He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Watson, your initial thoughts on the physical evidence?" I considered the discoloration, the peculiar scent, the lack of struggle. "The discoloration on the neck suggests something local, Mr. Holmes, perhaps a highly localized irritant or a swiftly acting toxin. The peculiar scent, I am unfamiliar with it, but it certainly suggests an artificial agent, and the suddenness, coupled with the look of bewilderment, implies a rapid onset without much opportunity for resistance or alarm. The ivory figurine, clutched as it is, might suggest either a final, desperate attempt to seek comfort, or perhaps—" I trailed off, unwilling to speculate further without more information. Holmes nodded slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Precisely, Watson. The absence of a struggle, the locked room, the peculiar scent, and that misplaced figurine. These are not merely details. They are the brushstrokes of a deliberate hand. Our killer, it seems, possesses a certain flair for the dramatic, or perhaps a desire for a particular form of theatrical silence." He moved to the small, empty silver locket again, picking it up with a pair of forceps he produced from his waistcoat pocket. "And this, Inspector? Any idea of its contents?" Davies shook his head. "None, Mr. Holmes. Mrs. Gable didn't recognise it. It's not part of his usual desk clutter." Holmes held the locket up to the gaslight, its silver surface reflecting the dim glow. A curious omission. A locket almost always holds a likeness, a memory. To be empty, it suggests either a recent removal or an intended purpose yet unfulfilled. He slipped the locket into an evidence bag, his eyes now gleaming with that familiar fire of pursuit. "The fog, Watson, has not only obscured the street, but for a moment it obscured the truth. But truth, like dawn, always finds a way to pierce the thickest veil. We have much to unravel here. Good evening, Inspector. I believe we have garnered all the necessary initial observations from this most intriguing parlour." As we left the quiet, death-shrouded house on Lambeth Street, the fog seemed to press in even closer, as if unwilling to release the secrets it held. The city's muffled coughs and distant cries were consumed by the swirling grey, leaving only the clatter of our hansom cab echoing faintly into the deepening mystery. Chapter 2. of spices, silks, and a shady transaction. The following morning dawned, if one could call it that, with a persistent drizzle that had mercifully cleared the dense fog, replacing it with a grey, weeping sky. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the myriad aromas of a waking London. Holmes, having spent the night in restless thought, punctuated by the scratching of his violin and the occasional puff of his pipe, declared that our first port of call would be the bustling heart of the city's lesser-known trade, a section of the East End market known for its exotic imports. The peculiar scent, Watson, he explained over a meagre breakfast of toast and coffee, was not merely floral. It possessed a subtle, yet distinct, undercurrent of a spice, one not commonly found in English kitchens. A very specific, rather expensive spice, often used in certain Eastern concoctions and sometimes, I have learned, in rare pigments. Our hansom clattered through increasingly narrow and crowded streets, the genteel brickwork of Baker Street giving way to the vibrant chaos of Whitechapel. The marketplace, when we eventually alighted, was a riot of colour, sound, and smell. Stalls overflowed with silks from Persia, intricate carvings from India, pungent spices in Hessian sacks, and a cacophony of vendors hawking their wares. The ground was slick with mud and discarded refuse, and the air thrummed with the energy of 1,000 haggling voices. Holmes, in his usual unassuming attire, moved through the throng with an almost ethereal grace, his gaze sweeping over the various stalls, pausing occasionally to observe a vendor or a customer. I, a mere mortal, struggled to keep pace, navigating around crates of fruits and barrels of salted fish, inhaling a bewildering array of scents. "Here, Watson," Holmes finally announced, stopping before a particularly cluttered stall, overflowing with an assortment of spices, dried herbs, and small colourful vials. The proprietor was a short, corpulent man with a magnificent handlebar moustache, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was currently engaged in a lively debate with a customer over the price of saffron. "Good day, Mr. Jabez," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the din with surprising clarity. "I trust business is thriving." Jabez, startled, looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he recognised Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, to what do I owe this most unexpected honour? One does not usually find the great detective amidst the humble aromas of the East." He grinned, a flash of gold tooth visible. "Merely an inquiry, Jabez," Holmes replied, his tone conversational. "I am interested in a particular spice, one that is exceedingly rare, often imported from the deepest reaches of the Orient, possessing a distinct, almost cloying sweetness, often confused with certain floral notes." Jabez stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "Oh, you speak of the dragon's breath, perhaps? Or sultan's tears? We have many such treasures, Mr. Holmes, for the discerning palate or the adventurous alchemist." He winked, a knowing glint in his eye. "No, Jabez," Holmes corrected smoothly. "I speak of crimson orchid powder, a pigment as much as a spice, known for its vibrant hue and, as I understand, its narcotic properties when refined." Jabez's smile faltered slightly. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Crimson orchid, you say? A potent substance, Mr. Holmes. Very rare, very expensive, and not, if I may say, for the casual dabbler, used in specific inks, certain ancient dyes, and, yes, as you say, certain sedatives." "Indeed," Holmes said, his eyes fixed on Jabez. "Have you had a recent customer for such a commodity? A gentleman of advanced years, perhaps, with a refined air, interested in its more esoteric applications?" Jabez hesitated, wiping his hands on his apron. "It is not a daily seller, Mr. Holmes. I had but one customer for it a week or so ago, a most particular gentleman. He asked many questions about its properties, its preparation. He purchased a considerable quantity, more than any artist would require, I should think." "And his description, Jabez?" Holmes pressed. "Tall, thin, with spectacles," Jabez recounted, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Dressed in fine but somewhat plain dark clothes, carried a small leather satchel, spoke with a precise, almost academic manner, mentioned something about an experiment and the need for purity." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. The description fit Mr. Silas Blackwood remarkably well. Yet, why would a respected philanthropist and collector be purchasing a substance known for its narcotic properties? The plot thickened, taking on an even more sinister hue. "Did he mention his name, Jabez?" I inquired. Jabez shook his head. "No, doctor, just paid in cash, a rather large sum, and left." He seemed in a hurry, almost agitated. He then lowered his voice, but he did drop something. A small piece of paper near the crate of cumin. I picked it up, thinking to return it, but he was already gone. It seemed to be a receipt or perhaps a delivery note for a very particular type of glass vial, marked with a peculiar symbol, a coiled serpent around a stylized M. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A coiled serpent and an M, and this was on a receipt for glass vials. Where was this establishment located, Jabez? "Down by the river, Mr. Holmes. A small glassblower's shop, rather obscure, near the Lambeth Bridge, if I recall. They specialise in very precise scientific glassware. The Serpent's Coil Glass Works, I believe it was called." Holmes thanked Jabez, leaving him with a brief, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction. As we navigated our way back through the bustling market, the information weighed heavily on my mind. Blackwood, buying a potent, possibly dangerous substance, and then acquiring specialised glass vials. It painted a picture far removed from the scholarly life we had imagined. "A surprising revelation, Holmes," I remarked as we hailed another hansom. "Mr. Blackwood, it seems, had a secret life, or at least a clandestine hobby." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his gaze already distant, lost in thought. "The man who collects ancient texts and supports charities is also procuring refined sedatives and custom glassware. The pieces begin to fit, albeit into a most disquieting mosaic. The peculiar discoloration on Blackwood's neck, the unusual scent, they acquire a new, more sinister interpretation with the introduction of crimson orchid powder, and the empty locket. Perhaps a clue related to this secret pursuit, or something meant to be used with it. Our next destination, Holmes declared, would be the glassblower's shop. The drizzle continued, mirroring the increasing gloom of the mystery. As we journeyed towards the riverside, the vibrant chaos of the market receded, replaced by the grim uniformity of warehouse districts and the industrial clangor of the docks. The image of the serene, learned Mr. Blackwood buying exotic poisons for an unknown experiment was a chilling juxtaposition, hinting at a web of deceit far more intricate than we had initially imagined. The Lambeth Bridge loomed ahead, its iron girders stark against the grey sky, and beneath it, I knew, lay the promise of another revelation, perhaps even more unsettling than the last. Chapter 3. The Cryptic Inscription and the Scholar's Rivalry. The Serpent's Coil Glassworks proved to be an unassuming establishment, tucked away on a cobbled lane not far from the Thames, its grimy windows reflecting the grey, drizzling sky. The air here was thick with the scent of coal smoke and river damp, a stark contrast to the spiced chaos of the market. Inside, the shop was hot and close, dominated by a large roaring furnace and an array of intricate glass apparatus, from delicate beakers to elaborate alembics. The proprietor, a thin, stooped man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his hands calloused and stained, was named Mr. Thorne. He was meticulously blowing a complex piece of glassware when we entered, seemingly oblivious to the smoke and heat. Holmes, with his usual directness, presented the crumpled receipt Jabez had described. Thorne examined it, a flicker of recognition in his pale eyes. "Ah, yes," he rasped, his voice a little hoarse from the heat. "A special order. Very precise work. The gentleman desired a series of extremely slender vials, with an almost imperceptible opening, designed for a specific aerosol mechanism, most unusual, and the symbol," he pointed to the coiled serpent on the receipt, "that was a personal mark he wished etched onto each piece, said it was for a private scientific endeavour." "And the gentleman's description?" Holmes inquired, his voice low and steady. Thorne paused, wiping his brow with a forearm. "Tall, refined, meticulous, carried a small leather satchel. Yes, I remember him clearly. He paid handsomely in cash, emphasized the need for discretion and speed, said the vials were for a very particular experiment involving ancient methods of preservation." The description once again perfectly matched Mr. Silas Blackwood. The details about aerosol mechanism and ancient methods of preservation sent a shiver down my spine. The pieces were indeed coalescing, forming a picture of a deliberate, perhaps even scientific act of murder. "Did he mention anyone else involved in this endeavour?" Holmes pressed. "Or perhaps any associates?" Thorne shook his head. No, sir. He was quite solitary in his dealings. Seemed rather secretive, actually. Though I did hear him mutter something under his breath about Professor Armitage and his misguided theories as he left. It was a fleeting comment, but the name stuck because I knew Professor Armitage, a celebrated Egyptologist at the British Museum, often commissioned some of my more exotic storage vessels. This was a new thread. Professor Armitage? I repeated, intrigued. A colleague? Or perhaps a rival? A rival, perhaps, in the academic sense, Thorne mused. Mr. Blackwood was also known for his collection of ancient artefacts, particularly Egyptian ones. They both often bid on the same rare finds at auction. I imagine there would be a degree of professional jealousy. Holmes thanked Thorne, leaving him with an instruction to inform us if he recalled anything further. As we walked out into the damp street, Holmes's expression was one of intense concentration. Professor Armitage, an unexpected yet entirely logical turn. Collectors and scholars, Watson, often harbour passions as fierce as any warrior. The ancient methods of preservation, coupled with the crimson orchid powder and the aerosol vial, this speaks not just of murder, but of a calculated, almost ritualistic act. Our next journey took us across the city to the esteemed British Museum, a sanctuary of knowledge and history, now bustling with its usual afternoon crowds. The change in atmosphere was palpable, from the industrial grit of Lambeth to the hushed grandeur of the museum halls. Professor Armitage, a man of venerable age with a wild mane of white hair and a perpetually distracted air, was found in his cluttered study, surrounded by peppery and ancient tools. His spectacles were perpetually slipping down his nose, and his tweed jacket was covered in a fine layer of dust. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Armitage exclaimed, rising with an air of mild surprise. "To what do I owe this visitation? Have you come to consult on the decipherment of the new Etruscan tablets?" "Our inquiry today, Professor, pertains not to ancient languages, but to a modern tragedy," Holmes began, his tone grave. "We are investigating the unfortunate demise of Mr. Silas Blackwood." Armitage's jovial expression instantly vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock and sorrow. Silas? Dead? Good heavens! How did this happen? He was a meticulous man, quite robust for his age. "We are endeavouring to ascertain the precise circumstances, Professor," I interjected. "We understand you are acquainted with him?" "Acquainted? My dear doctor, we were academic adversaries, perhaps, but also long-standing colleagues and, dare I say, friends," Armitage corrected, running a hand through his already dishevelled hair. "We shared a mutual passion for ancient Egyptian funerary practices, though we often clashed over interpretation and certain, shall we say, unorthodox theories of his." "Unorthodox theories?" Holmes prompted, his eyes gleaming. "Indeed," Armitage sighed. "Silas, bless his adventurous spirit, had a fascination with the notion of spirit transference, or, as he termed it, ethereal preservation through specific alchemical processes known only to a select few ancient priests. He believed certain rare botanicals, when precisely administered, could extend the vitality of the spirit beyond the decay of the body, allowing it to reside within a chosen vessel, typically a specially prepared artifact. Nonsense, of course, from a scientific standpoint, but a compelling romantic notion. "And the specific botanicals, Professor?" Holmes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, he was obsessed with one in particular," Armitage replied, leaning forward conspiratorially. "A substance he believed was mentioned in a cryptic inscription found on an obscure funerary stele from the 18th dynasty. He called it Kaif's veil, though I suspect it was merely an ancient name for a highly refined narcotic with hallucinogenic properties. He was convinced it was key to his ethereal preservation theory." "Kaif's veil?" Holmes repeated, a glint in his eye. "Would this substance be characterized by a sweet, almost cloying scent, and a vibrant crimson colour when processed?" Armitage's eyes widened. "Precisely. He would talk for hours about it, said he was very close to isolating the active compound to prove his theory. He even spoke of a specific vessel he intended to use, a small ivory figurine of the goddess Isis, I believe." My breath caught in my throat. The ivory figurine clutched in Blackwood's hand, the crimson orchid powder, the aerosol vials, the ethereal preservation. It was all falling into place, a horrifying tapestry woven with misguided ambition and a twisted scientific pursuit. "Professor," Holmes said, his voice now crisp and commanding, Did Mr. Blackwood have any other rivals? Any individual who might have wished to silence him, or perhaps steal his research for their own gain? Armitage frowned, lost in thought. Silas was a private man, Mr. Holmes, but he did mention a younger scholar, a Dr. Alistair Croft. Brilliant, ambitious, but with a rather envious streak. Croft had worked for Silas as a research assistant some years ago, assisting him in the translation of those very ancient texts on ethereal preservation. But they had a rather spectacular falling out. Silas accused Croft of plagiarism, of trying to claim credit for his groundbreaking theories. Croft in turn called Silas a deluded charlatan. They hadn't spoken in years. Dr. Alistair Croft, Holmes murmured, a new name to add to our growing list. Do you have an address for this Dr. Croft, Professor? Armitage provided an address for a small residence in Bloomsbury. As we left the British Museum, the rain had finally ceased, but the air remained heavy with unresolved questions. The nature of Blackwood's death now seemed chillingly clear. Not merely murder, but a perverse echo of his own theories, a macabre preservation. But who had orchestrated it, and why? Was it Croft, seeking revenge or intellectual conquest? Or was Blackwood merely a pawn in a larger, more sinister game? The answers, Holmes implied, lay now in the shadows of Bloomsbury, a new chapter in this unfolding tragedy. Chapter 4. The Abandoned Atelier and the Shadowed Betrayal. Our pursuit of Dr. Alistair Croft led us away from the grand intellectual halls of the British Museum and into the quieter, more bohemian streets of Bloomsbury. The air, though still cool, had a less oppressive feel than the riverside, replaced by the faint scent of charcoal and oil paints that often permeated this artistic quarter. Croft's address, however, was not a bustling studio or a modest scholar's flat, but rather an abandoned atelier, its windows grimy and broken, nestled amongst a cluster of overgrown, neglected gardens. The setting sun, now finally breaking through the clouds, cast long, eerie shadows, turning the derelict building into a silhouette of forlorn grandeur. A strange choice for a scholar of ancient texts, Watson, Holmes observed, his eyes scanning the crumbling facade, or perhaps an entirely predictable one for a man seeking to distance himself from his former life. We approached the heavy wooden door which hung slightly ajar on rusted hinges. The garden around it was a tangle of wild roses and choked ivy, hinting at a past beauty now consumed by neglect. A broken terracotta pot lay overturned near a withered fountain, a poignant symbol of decay. It seems to have been abandoned for some time, I remarked, pushing the door open further. The interior was cavernous and cold, filled with dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the broken windows. Discarded canvases lay stacked against walls, their painted surfaces obscured by cobwebs. A solitary easel stood in the centre of the room, draped with a tattered sheet, like a ghost of artistic endeavour. Holmes moved with his customary stealth, his gaze sweeping over the debris, his senses alert to any disturbance. He paused at a workbench, still littered with half-empty paint tubes, dried brushes, and a peculiar collection of small, intricate metal components. Among these, I noticed a tiny, empty glass vial, identical to the description Mr. Thorne had given. "Here, Watson," Holmes murmured, holding up the vial with his forceps. Our elusive Dr. Croft, it seems, has a hidden talent for more than just ancient languages. These are components for a delicate spring-loaded mechanism, an atomizer perhaps, designed to disperse a fine mist. My mind raced, connecting the dots, crimson orchid powder, aerosol vials, an atomizer mechanism. The method of Silas Blackwood's death was becoming sickeningly clear. He had been sprayed with the refined narcotic, perhaps mistaking it for one of his own ethereal preservation experiments, and the effect had been swift and bewildering. Holmes continued his examination, his fingers delicately sifting through a pile of discarded papers. He suddenly straightened, holding up a small folded piece of parchment. It was a diagram, meticulously drawn, detailing the precise specifications for the aerosol mechanism Thorne had described, and at the bottom, in a flowing, elegant script, was the signature, A. Croft. "So Croft has indeed been here," I stated, a grim satisfaction in my voice, "and he possessed the means and the knowledge to construct the murder weapon." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing, "but the motive remains incomplete. Plagiarism and professional rivalry are powerful drivers, but they seldom lead to such a sophisticated, almost ritualistic execution. There is something more, I believe, a deeper venom in this particular serpent's coil. He moved towards a back room, a smaller chamber that seemed to have served as a more private study or storage area. The air here was even colder, and a faint, musty smell of damp earth clung to the shadows. A heavy wooden chest sat in one corner, its lid slightly ajar. Holmes nudged it open with his foot, revealing a collection of ancient artifacts, similar to those Blackwood collected. Small statuettes, fragments of papyrus, and a heavy tarnished silver amulet engraved with strange symbols. But what truly caught my eye, and Holmes's, was a small, leather-bound journal lying open on top of the artifacts. Its pages were filled with Croft's distinctive handwriting. Holmes picked it up with a gloved hand, his eyes quickly scanning the entries. "Listen to this, Watson," Holmes said, his voice unusually grave. He read aloud. "Silas's delusion deepens. His Kaif's veil is potent, yes, but not for the spirit. It is a key, not to immortality, but to unlocking access. He believes the power lies in the chemical, but the true power lies in the vessel, the one he guards so jealously. The amulet of Thoth, which he hides in plain sight amongst his lesser treasures. If I can secure it, before he truly understands its potency, I can complete the work myself. His ethereal preservation is a fool's game. True power demands the complete removal of the spirit, not its mere relocation. And the locket must hold the proof of the transformation." Holmes looked up, his face etched with a grim understanding. "The amulet of Thoth, Watson, the locket. And true power demands the complete removal of the spirit. This is not merely a dispute over ancient texts or academic credit. This is a far more sinister ambition. Croft was not merely seeking to replicate Blackwood's work, he sought to pervert it, to steal something far more valuable than a theory. The amulet of Thoth, I mused, remembering the glint of tarnished silver within the chest. And Blackwood's empty locket. Is it possible that the locket was meant to hold something other than a likeness? Perhaps something taken from him? Holmes nodded slowly, a dark fire in his eyes. "Precisely, Watson. Blackwood's own fascination with ethereal preservation made him a perfect, unsuspecting victim for Croft's far more sinister ambition. Croft has used Blackwood's own theories against him. The crimson orchid powder, delivered with such precision, bewildered Blackwood, allowing Croft to take something from him that he guarded with his life. Not just an ancient amulet, but something far more ephemeral, something represented by that empty locket." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the grimy windows, plunging the atelier into deeper gloom, the enormity of Croft's betrayal became chillingly apparent. This was not a crime of passion or simple revenge. This was a cold, calculated act of scientific piracy, driven by an ambition so twisted it sought to manipulate life and death itself. Holmes's gaze, sharp and unwavering in the encroaching darkness, spoke of a truth he had finally grasped, a truth that demanded swift and decisive action. Our investigation had moved beyond the mere who and how, and into the terrifying why, revealing a depth of human depravity that even I, a man of war, found profoundly disturbing. The game, as Holmes would say, was most certainly afoot, and the shadows of Bloomsbury held the final chilling answer. Chapter 5. The Unveiling at the Collector's Gala. The culmination of our investigation led us not to another dingy back alley or an abandoned dwelling, but to the opulent splendour of the annual Collector's Gala, held within the grand ballroom of the Duke of Richmond's estate in Kensington. The irony was not lost on me. The very world of ancient treasures and scholarly pursuits that had formed the backdrop for Mr. Silas Blackwood's demise was now to be the stage for his murderer's unveiling. The night was crisp and clear, a welcome change from the pervasive fog and drizzle, with stars twinkling coldly overhead, as if observing the human drama unfold below. Holmes, impeccably dressed in evening wear, moved through the glittering throng with an air of detached observation, his eyes missing nothing. I, feeling somewhat out of place amongst the silks and diamonds, tried my best to maintain a composed demeanour, my medical bag, however, conspicuously absent. Dr. Alistair Croft was present, as Holmes had predicted, appearing surprisingly self-assured, even triumphant, as he conversed with various influential figures, a glass of champagne in hand. He wore a dark velvet jacket, and his usual air of academic dishevelment had been replaced by a polished, almost predatory charm. Holmes had arranged a discreet meeting with Inspector Davies earlier, outlining his theory and the necessary evidence to secure Croft's apprehension. The inspector, though initially sceptical of the fantastical elements of ethereal preservation, had been swayed by the concrete evidence, the crimson orchid powder, the custom vials, and Croft's journal. As the Duke began his welcoming address, Holmes approached Croft, his expression calm, almost conversational. "Dr. Croft," he began, his voice cutting through the polite murmur of the room, "a most elegant affair tonight. One could almost forget the grim realities that sometimes lurk beneath such gilded surfaces." Croft turned, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor passing through his composure. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a pleasure, though unexpected. I trust you are enjoying the evening's offerings." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his eyes fixed on Croft's. "Though my interest, I confess, lies less in the antiquities on display and more in a certain recent acquisition, one not listed in the Duke's catalogue." Croft's smile tightened. "I am afraid I do not follow you, Mr. Holmes." "Oh, but I believe you do, Doctor," Holmes countered, his voice losing its conversational tone now imbued with a chilling certainty. "We speak, of course, of Mr. Silas Blackwood's Amulet of Thoth, and the peculiar emptiness of his silver locket." A visible pallor spread across Croft's face, his hand tightening around his champagne flute. You're mistaken, Mr. Holmes. I know nothing of such things, and to suggest I would—" "I suggest nothing, Dr. Croft," Holmes interrupted, his voice now ringing with authority, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. "I state facts gleaned from your own meticulously kept journal, found in your abandoned atelier in Bloomsbury, a building whose dusty solitude was not quite sufficient to conceal your darker pursuits." Inspector Davies, who had positioned himself discreetly nearby, now stepped forward, his expression stern. "Dr. Croft, we have reason to believe you were responsible for the death of Mr. Silas Blackwood." The murmurs grew louder. Croft's eyes darted frantically around the room, assessing his escape options, but the inspector's constables had already moved to block the exits. "Preposterous!" Croft spat, regaining a sliver of his composure. "An absurd fabrication. Silas Blackwood was a deluded fool, but I would never—" "You would, Dr. Croft," Holmes interjected, "because his delusion was merely a convenient cloak for your own, far more sinister, ambition. Blackwood's Kyphe's veil, or as it is more commonly known, crimson orchid powder, was indeed potent, but not in the way he imagined. He believed it would preserve the spirit. You, however, understood its true application. A highly effective, swiftly acting narcotic, capable of rendering a man utterly bewildered and vulnerable. You used his own ethereal preservation mechanism, the aerosol vials, to administer the substance, precisely targeting him while he sat in his study, clutching the very vessel he believed would house his preserved spirit." Holmes paused, allowing his words to sink in. "The motive, Dr. Croft, was not merely intellectual envy, nor financial gain, but a perversion of Blackwood's own theories. You believed that by using the crimson orchid to momentarily disorient him, you could extract from him what you truly desired. Not merely the Amulet of Thoth, but what you foolishly believed to be his very essence, his spirit, which you sought to trap within Blackwood's own silver locket. You sought to prove his theories right, but with a horrifying twist, to demonstrate a complete removal, a total obliteration of the spirit from the body, placing it under your own control." Croft's face was now a mask of frantic desperation, his veneer crumbling entirely. He was a fool. His theories were sentimental drivel. I sought to show him the true power, the true ancient knowledge. The amulet was merely a focus, a conduit for the capture of his ethereal essence. "A fool's ambition, Dr. Croft," Holmes stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You mistook a narcotic's bewildering effect for a spiritual phenomenon. The empty locket, clutched by Blackwood in his final moments, was merely a symbolic gesture of a man's last desperate grasp at a belief, and perhaps a memory of a beloved face he kept there, before you emptied it. Your grand experiment, born of envy and twisted ambition, resulted in nothing more than cold-blooded murder. The crimson orchid merely clouded his mind long enough for you to remove the amulet, and perhaps other items you coveted, leaving him to succumb to the narcotic's profound and fatal effect. Davies stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Croft's shoulder. "Dr. Croft, you are under arrest for the murder of Mr. Silas Blackwood." Croft sagged, his defiance utterly broken. He offered no resistance as the constables led him away, his grand scholarly ambitions dissolving into the harsh reality of an ordinary criminal act. As the whispers died down, and the guests resumed their polite conversations, now tinged with morbid fascination, Holmes turned to me, a flicker of that familiar satisfaction in his piercing eyes. "Another tapestry unravelled, Watson, woven from the threads of misguided genius, envy, and the dark allure of ancient misinterpreted power. The fog over Lambeth Street, as it turns out, was merely a curtain drawn over a far more complex and chilling drama. We left the dazzling ball, stepping out into the clear, cool night. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if in silent affirmation of the truth that had been brought to light. Another case closed, another mystery solved, thanks to the unparalleled intellect of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadowed streets of London.